I'm Don. Same time last year, we discovered that my wife has cancer. We kept the news to ourselves until after the new year. Then I told my patrons and they jumped to help us out. Thus, this miniature painting video is extra special. Today we're painting a printed obsession miniature wherein we're going to use speed paints, we're going to layer and even airbrush speed paints and try to come up with a really nice miniature. So watch as we turn this beautiful miniature into this. I'm Don, welcome to my studio. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. And of course, this channel won't be possible without the support of my patrons. So basically this miniature painting video is extra special because we're painting something from Printed Obsession. After learning about the cancer of my wife, Printed Obsession immediately subscribed to my Patreon for 1 whole year. So it was a huge help. So since there's additional pressure to make the painting of this miniature extra good, you could see me here like looking at the miniature for hours. Like I spent maybe 3 hours just looking at the miniature and thinking of ways to make the painting efficient yet like make sure that I come up with a really good one. Also watch until the end of the video for our tip time. So as advised by Army Painter, we start with light colors and then we go to dark. Like we're painting from light to dark basically. We start painting with maize yellow, which is becoming one of my fav colors in the Army Painter 2.0 range. I do have the complete set of Army Painter Speedpaint 2.0, but this maize yellow is really growing on me. Now we're painting with Forest Sprite. I kinda misjudged this color. This color is one of the brightest or lightest color in the Speedpaint range. However, it creates a very nice contrast that is a little bit too dark for me. Midway through like painting Forest Sprite with this huge miniature, which was a bit tiring to be honest because of lots of there are so many areas to paint and so many hard to reach areas. But it was nice and fun, but I found the color a little bit too dark. And to be honest, it's a little bit too yellow-green. Oh, don't get me wrong, the color is beautiful. I think it's perfect for our Typhus giveaway, which I'll be painting later today. So basically, the main strength of speed paints is that it creates very nice contrast. It has deep shadows and subtle highlights. However, those deep shadows can easily go very dark as you layer speed paints. After painting Forest Sprite all over the model, I decided to add a bit more saturation and brightness or vibrancy to the model. So I'm using this color. Gilly Dew is brighter and a bit more vibrant than Forest Sprite, a bit more yellowish, but I should have started with this color. Oh, by the way, do take note that in this painting, this miniature painting, I kinda like painting with 2 base colors. So I'm using for this one, I started with Forest Sprite, even though I think I should have started with this Dew color and then combine both these colors to create a nicer or deeper contrast with a darker color, but a vibrant, a brighter finish for the base color. The colors of the Army Painter Speedpaint, especially the 2.0, are very vibrant and very well designed. Using just one paint to paint a part of your miniature will give you nice contrast, nice shades, vibrant base colors, and subtle highlights. However, combining subtleties of pastel colors and then darker base colors and eventually darker shades, as you'll see later in the video, will yield you better results because it will give you more color depth. This pastel seafoam is beautiful, but to be honest, it's outside my comfort zone. I'm not really used to painting with pastels, with very light colors. I like vibrant, very saturated colors. So this one was, I was really not comfortable while I was painting this color. This pastel colors, including this seafoam, doesn't give you the same contrast as the darker colors, of course. It won't give you the same shade. So now we're using plasmatic bolt, which has a darker shade once you apply it with the airbrush, especially once you apply it with the brush. So you might ask why I'm using the airbrush to apply the shades with this plasmatic bolt. Basically, I'm tired at this point already because the miniature is big. After painting all the green parts, the green scales of this miniature, I was kinda getting tired. After painting all these colors, now we proceed to pastel salmon. In this part of the video, I kinda learned to really maximize the properties of these pastel colors and then layering darker colors on top of it. So with this pastel salmon, I applied it in 2 thin coats. So make sure that you let dry in between coats and then you'll have a really nice solid coverage after a couple of coats. Now we use Crusader skin because we really like the shades that the Crusader skin produces. So painting it over the pastel salmon kinda gave us a very nice solid skin color. So you could see the ears has very nice shades from the Crusader skin, and yet the base color is a little bit more bright because of the salmon. The next painting, I should have started with palette bone to give it a nice good base color and then use this bony matter as my shade color. The bony matter has a very nice deep shade, but of course the base color is a bit thin because it's a bone color. So layering down like a palette bone first before painting this bony matter will yield you better results. So I let this color dry for a while and then use the hair dryer after the paint has settled down on the crevices. So after the hair dryer, I applied a thin second coat on the base areas. Now we paint Princess Pink. This is similar to the pastel colors and is a little bit more opaque than the usual speed paints. So much like the pastel colors, this color is a perfect foundation before you paint with your actual base color. Also similar to the pastel colors, I applied Princess Pink in a couple of thin coats, making sure that I let dry in between coats. Do not be too meticulous, making sure not to paint over the teeth and stuff like that, because you could easily paint over the teeth after painting all these colors. Now we paint our actual base color, which is Familiar Pink. Familiar Pink, similar to most speed paints, is like an ink type color and it's perfect as your shade or dark base color. Now you see in the video that I'm using Familiar Pink as my foundation color for the red gloss. You see, if you paint red speed paint on top of the white claw, you will produce nice contrast but your highlights would be a bit too white-ish. So I decided to paint with Familiar Pink first so that I have a very pink highlight color. So the gums is looking too pink, so I needed to use aged hide to give it a more gum-like color. So you could see you could actually do very nice layering with speed paints. It will produce you very unique combinations of colors and your color depth will be very nice. Now we paint with poppy red, which is a very, very vibrant red color on the claws, because I wanted this claws to be super red with subtle highlights of familiar pink that we painted earlier. Now we are practically finished with our base color with speed paints. I'm not really very, but I'm happy with the result so far. Now people ask me how do I clean up my speed painting. Well, basically I do not use speed paints after the initial base color with speed paints. You see, if you insist on using speed paints like there are errors, you have to paint white first and then paint the speed paint on top of the white. That is kinda tedious. So I recommend that you paint with regular paints. So for example, you're cleaning up a yellow part because you painted green on top of that yellow part. You might as well just paint yellow, but yellow is a bit too weak in terms of coverage, so you might need to paint white and then paint yellow paint. You don't need to paint with speed paints again because that can be tedious and it's not really, it doesn't really look good. Now this is still the first day of painting and I'm really tired at this point. This is kinda late night and late afternoon, so I'm airbrushing the clouds. So I'm just airbrushing from the bottom part of the model so that I produce a zenithal effect of some sort and it forms like a really nice shading for the clouds. Now we're done with the first day of painting, which is basically the base colors with speed paints. We'll let this cure overnight and then give it a quick matte varnish. After the matte varnish, I decided to add a little bit more highlights on the other side of the model. So I used an ivory paint, a regular paint, and dry brush on the other side. I'm using an Army Painter dry brush, a masterclass dry brush, and it worked like a charm. I did not dry brush the whole model, I just dry brushed the areas where I think my main source of light will hit the model. Now let's talk about speed paints again, but let's talk about the differences. You see here that Zealot Yellow is more ink-like and it's very transparent even in the bottle, and Pastel Yellow is a little bit more opaque. So you should notice this and keep this in mind when you're layering with speed paints. Similar to Pastel Seafoam and the Plasmatic Bolt, the Bolt is a little bit more ink-like, not a little bit. It is ink-like and very transparent, and the Pastel Seafoam is kinda opaque. Basically, if you use the semi-opaque speed paints, usually the pastel colors on top of the other speed paints, it will dilute your contrast. It will kinda fill in your crevices. So it's kinda more advisable to paint the pastel colors first before you paint the ink-like speed paints. Thus, you see me here using the more transparent speed paint, which is Plasmatic Bolt, and I'm airbrushing it on the dry brushing. This color, much like most speed paints and unlike the pastel colors, will not affect my shade areas. It will not cover my shade areas and my contrast. So here, with Zealot Yellow, I kinda like adding more transparency to the speed paint by adding a bit more medium. So basically, you don't really need to thin speed paints for airbrushing because it's thin enough for airbrushing already. So you don't even need to use flow improver, you just need to make sure that you clean in between colors. I'm actually using a 0.2 needle at around 20 psi. So basically, since you don't really need to thin speed paints for airbrushing, I added medium to add more transparency because I find Zealot Yellow, especially for filtering, to be too saturated. So by adding medium, I added more transparency to the mixture. Of course, you can use water to add transparency, but it will make the mixture too thin and it might run all over the model. Now the layering with Cuttlefish Colors and the highlighting I did not really record on film because it's just a matter of using a lot of Tainted Snow, which is ice yellow for Cuttlefish, and Minty Shake, which is pastel seafoam. It looks like pastel seafoam for the highlight. So I'm just basically using that color, Minty Shake and Tainted Snow for the highlights, and then glazing it down with different colors so that I produce very nice color depth. So you all know that I really love my cuttlefish because they're pre-glazed paints, and when I do sketching and layering with them, I kind of produce really nice blending and gradations almost automatically. So it's just a matter of like sketching highlights and then glazing it down and then sketching more highlights on some areas, and of course painting details. Now it's time for our tip time. Now before I reveal, a ton of thanks to all my patrons, because without my patrons, this channel won't be possible. Now my main tip for layering speed paints is basically to know your paints. Well, basically, speed paints is very beginner friendly because it's a bit more consistent in terms of viscosity in comparison to other brands of the same type. Also, the coverage and even the saturation of speed paints is pretty consistent regardless of the color. However, it's very important to note that the pastel colors has a little bit more opacity. The opacity of pastel colors will affect like the layers underneath it, so make sure you plan ahead in terms of using these pastel colors. In most cases, the speed paints is like true to its word, like I said in one of my videos, and it's a really nice one-coat solution. However, for lighter colors, I tend to like to apply them in 2 thin coats. 2 thin coats of the pastel colors will give you a more solid coverage, and then 2 thin coats of the usual speed paints will give you a darker finish. Now take note of this darker finish. As you layer speed paints on top of each other, the recess areas will tend to become very dark. So you have to like pre-plan your layering a little bit, and then if you need a darker crevice but you've layered so much already, you may want to add a little bit of medium to your darker shades or your darker speed paints. However, again, it's important to note that if you add more medium to speed paint, it will tend to go to the recesses a bit more and will filter less. But at the end of the day, speed paints are super awesome. However, do not be too dependent on them on pulling off a really nicely painted miniature. You still have layering to do. So basically, if you follow my process, like use the speed paints for your base colors and then do layering and highlighting, and again use speed paints for your final shades, I'm pretty sure you'll come up with a beautiful miniature. Pansit, I hope you liked the video and watch these other videos.